Hi, I'm Doyle.
And I'm Jordan. And this week I want to pick up from last week's conversation regarding group dynamics. So we talked a lot about um, the maybe the uses of groups. Well, more so the reality of how they are formed and how some groups bolster their enrollment, right? So that their numbers grow. Not all groups follow the pattern that we talked about last time, which is, again, I hate saying it this way, but I'm going to say it just for simplicity, kind of instilling fear in individuals to have them join the group to try to mitigate the fears that they are instilling. And maybe not instilling, but maybe highlighting or uh, drawing into stark relief, or not exacerbating, but just making clear and present in someone's mind these fears, concerns, anxieties, however you want to term that. And I think that any kind of group that depends on such a method to bolster its enrollment is flawed from the outset, because that is not, to me, this is going back to something that we talked about in our episodes on agenda, narrative, and framing. Uh, for me, my agenda is truth, and anything that moves us farther away from truth, I think, is uh, not valid. Meaning that it is not conducive to long-term success for the individual or for society, right? In which those things are inextricably linked, but has to start with the individual, because if the individual is not, solid, clear, purpose driven, and principle driven, I find that in my experience, then the groups that they're in have the same dynamics, and then the groups that those groups are in vis-a-vis society begins to take on that same instability. So you can think about the individual as the pillars that all of these things rest upon. So I think very much that's important. So I think that anyone who uses uh, fear, anxiety, playing on people's concerns as a way to, like, directly as a way to enroll them in that group's purpose is not aligned with truth in my perspective. And there's a lot of nuance around that, and we can talk about specific examples. And I would love to have, I know, Doyle, you and I are going to have a lot of agreement here, so there may not be much disagreement on that being the case, what I just said, or even examples that I would consider being not valid. But
Mhm.
point being is that regardless of the point of me calling them valid or not valid, is independent of their existence, their having members, the groups having members, and those groups operating and affecting both individuals and society. So we painted a concerning picture, of course, and I think maybe this isn't the episode. Maybe next episode we can talk about the positive side of group dynamics,
Sure.
because I think that is important to talk about and to highlight and characterize and understand that it exists, right? And I think that more of that exists than doesn't. But for this episode, I want to talk about why I think, and Doyle, I want your opinion too, on why I think that this kind of invalid group approach is detrimental to what we're trying to do here. Of course, I've kind of described a little bit of that, but why it's so, there's a cause for concern for it now in society that is very different than that cause before. It's not that it's a new cause; it's
Mhm.
that there's a little different perspective on it. So the whole thing here is the idea that, we have uh, interpersonal social networks, right? And I don't mean like social media social networks, although we will talk about
Mhm.
that, I think. But we have our own personal social networks where, I know X number of people, and of that, let's just say it's 300 people, I know 20 of them very, very well. And I know 50 of them not quite as well. And then all the rest of them, they're kind of acquaintances. Maybe there's more strata there. Um, it doesn't really matter. The point is that it's like concentric circles, right? I've got my closest circle, and then I've got another circle that's not quite as close, but not as distant as some of the others. So all of that is interesting because the things that we as individuals take on and consider, and when we shift our perspectives on things, when we take on new maybe say beliefs or practices or perspectives, at some point that's going to propagate out through that network, right? And in the past, that's only been to the speed at which, one, we could communicate. Well, it's always been to the speed at which we could communicate with each other, one, primarily, and two, the regularity with which we communicated with each other. So the difference being that the speed is how quickly can I say something and it reach all, let's say I have 500 members in my group. I think there's some number that's like the number of people that you have actual relationships with. It's like there's a name on it, but anyway, let's just say 500 is that number. There's a time difference between when I say that and it reaches all 500 of those people. That's the speed at which that communication happens, and then there's also the regularity. So like, how often am I communicating that, right? So those two things influence how quickly things will propagate through not just my social network, but all of society. Well, the reality is today, and it has been increasing, I think, probably forever. That speed is increasing. So the time between me saying something and it getting through all those people is reducing, basically day by day, more or less. And then the regularity with which us doing that depends on the individual, but I think on average it's gone way, 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 way up, right? And I think that's also increasing. So those two things are combined to create a thing that's always existed, but now has a name. Network effect is what it's called, right? It's so obvious now how impactful network effect is for everything, right? Even like a new kind of product, right? If I buy something, this is really good, I liked it, and then you kind of act as like a marketing representative in a way, advertising, even unintentionally, which has always been the case, but now it's really like that because you can
multiplied and magnified.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's why we have this whole thing called influencer now. That's all an influencer is. So that's nothing new, but the thing is, and this is where the crux of the point I'm getting to, and I know it's taking me a little while to get here, is that a lot of people try, and we've talked a bit about this before, a lot of people try to demonize social media. And my perspective is that social media is not the problem. Social media is just a grand accelerator of network effect, right? It allows us to share things much more frequently, almost no investment to share things. So that regularity, that frequency of sharing things increases. And it exponentially increases the speed at which that can reach all of those 500 people, and even well beyond that. Turns that 500 into 5,000 or 50,000 or even more. Especially because there's tools in these platforms that allow that amplification to happen even further. So that's good. If you ask me, that's good that we have such a tool. But it's like any tool, it can be dangerous, right? You look at like guns as a classic example, but an even less controversial example would be like a knife or like a shovel, right? A hammer, right? A hammer you can do some really bad damage with, but you can also do amazing, wonderful, life-sustaining things with, right? And so it's the same sort of thing with social media. It's an extremely powerful tool, probably the most powerful tool we've ever had as humans. Actually, my perspective is that it is the most powerful tool, and we can argue about that.
As individuals, you're talking about as an individual tool.
Yeah. Well, sure. Well, there are no other tools other than individual tools.
Nuclear bombs. What I was saying is, but that's a different tool that has potential greater impact. What I'm saying is, though, that's not available to the general population, but what you're talking about here is.
Oh, so you mean so for tools available to individuals, but I still maintain that social media is more powerful than the nuclear bomb.
Oh, I don't discount that. I'm just saying, though, but it's a tool that's available to the individuals that previously there weren't such a tool available.
But I think my point still remains, which is that I believe, and again, it's just my perspective. I'm not trying to assert objectively this is the case, but I really believe that this is objectively the case. I have because I can't prove it and blah 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 whatever. That social media is the most powerful tool we've ever had, and so because of that, we have to be very careful with how we use it. The problem is everybody has access to it, and very few people are very careful with how they use it. And so there's a lot of unintended consequences of how we use it. The thing is, I'm not even worried about the unintended consequences, because that's just going to happen. That's humanity. We adjust, we figure out how to adapt, no problem. What I'm worried about are the intended consequences that are unwittingly brought to fruition by people who aren't aware of what they're doing. And I don't say that to deride the people who are doing that, because I think that humans are going to be humans, and we have to accept that there's going to be a lot or a high level of unawareness in people's action, right? I don't think that we're ever going to change that en masse. But what we do have to hold to account, I think, are the groups that and I mean groups in the general sense that we've been talking about, groups that directly or indirectly, yet intentionally, use things like social media to exert their perspective and power at a greater reach than they would have on their own. That do it in ways that aren't aligned with truth. And I know that people will say, well, that's subjective. I'm sorry, it's not subjective, because you can characterize what you mean by that. And if I can characterize what I mean by that, then I make it objective. Now, you may not agree with that objective characterization of it, but then we need to pivot the conversation from all of the subsequent things and then back to that base characterization. And that's where I think most people are not equipped to speak about, because they don't have that context. They don't understand things at that level, or they don't care to understand things at that level, which is okay. People don't have to. There's no reason that everyone should. Or two, they aren't equipped to even understand things at that level, which is something that people have a real problem accepting is true of other people. Because, I think most people are mostly good, right? I think a vast majority of people are a vast majority of themselves good. And I think that in that goodness, people have wanted to think that everybody is exactly the same, right? Because we want to treat people fairly, that's laudable and respectable and honorable. But to think that everybody is the same in how they think about things, how they understand things and all that is not honorable at all. That's disrespectful, because what you're doing is you're disrespecting everybody's individuality and who they are. So you're saying you're not who you are, you're part of, or you're just like everything else. So disrespecting, and I mean that very seriously, and this is something that to me is a critical piece of my personal philosophy, is that if you believe that everybody is basically the same in the sense of how they do things, their abilities, their desires, their interests, all that kind of stuff, you are doing one of the worst. You're making one of the worst judgment calls possible of a human, and that, I think, is the base perspective that gets perverted ridiculously through all kinds of machinations and thought patterns that explode things like groups and systems which are 100% driven by fear basis, or 100% driven by control and manipulation and power games and all that kind of stuff.
Well, don't you think, though, because what you described is a series of circumstances or outcomes or behaviors that are driven because how people think and feel about something gets unduly magnified, right? Through the network effect, right?
Yeah.
Through you mentioned earlier about the concentric. I think the technical term is called the concentric circles of concern is sort of one of the psychological terms. And it's how, as it's close with the individual at the center, and then their closest, small 2 or 3, their nuclear group. Typically, that's the family, but it may not always be blood family. It may be other chosen, members in the inner circle. And then as the groups go out, as you described, what ends up happening, I think, is a phenomenon of this situation you described, is that group of, let's say, 500 that is more the acquaintance, because of the magnification of things like social media and the with all due respect, the ignorance that comes from not realizing that magnification, by saying something that is might be interpreted differently in an inner circle or a secondary circle, But when it's out in that broader circle, it can get misinterpreted or mischaracterized. But nonetheless, it still has the unintended impact or consequences. Although the behavior was intended, the consequences were unintended because of the difference in the interpretation. And so what I think that does is that sort of changes the dynamic of the concentric circles of concern, right? Let's say the secondary circle is the 50, the 50 of your closest friends, ones that, you may not do something on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, but you interact with them on some regularity, versus the larger group is the ones, well, you know them and you've interacted with them, but it might have been years since you've had any kind of social interaction or contact.
Sure.
You basically have turned that group of 500 into this more inner group, right? Yet they don't have the same degree of and depth of understanding to interpret the behavior in the same way.
Yep.
Right. And I think that sort of feeds into what you said about the network effect, right? Because I think most people, to your point, they're not trying to leverage the network effect, right? They're just trying to share like they would in the more inner circles of relationships, and not appreciating that. Now, there are some people that understand that, right? And that's sort of the where we are alluding to, that the ones that understand that are leveraging the network effect for to achieve a certain agenda, right? And or at least there's the potential risk of that. I'm not necessarily accusing or standing here with factual evidence of all of these different scenarios, but I think by what we see ipso facto that does exist. Right.
Sure.
And if it's not an intentional, it's an intentional behavior that maybe is having unintentional consequences. But I contend that in some cases it is intentional behavior, it is intentional choice, and it's an intentional consequences to create what you said earlier, the fear.
Sure. I mean,
so
you can look at a lot of these organizations that have like charters and guidelines and principles on their websites, and it's like you can't say those things and do these things and not have it be an intentional leveraging, like you're saying.
That's in sync. It's in sync with what their espoused philosophies are and their behaviors.
Right.
Right. It's when there is no synchronization, or there's no known synchronization, that you get into this duplicitous and this more devious kind of potential there. And or nefarious potential, but I think it really makes great sense that the path that you've painted here, or the logical path, the path of logic here about this scenario with the network effect and how the dynamics of groups, and then going back to something we had alluded to in a previous discussion as well, the psychosocial, right, the individual needs being met inside the dynamics of the group, right? And then when we talked about group dynamics, that we sort of took that to the next level. There are tremendous, wonderful, good things about group dynamics, but when people understand that, then they're susceptible to manipulation. And
sure.
There have been numerous scenarios where there have been fatal consequences and tragic consequences where that were the case.
Oh, of course.
People walk themselves right into their own demise. If nothing else, the Jim Jones.
Oh yeah, cults generally, right? So
yeah, cults in general, right? But yeah, that's one of the ones that historically has been proven again and again and again that was the case. And it's hard to believe that was not one where the individual understood the dynamics of the group and then manipulated it to some end, right? And even though it's not one that we would understand, and cult, sometimes that is the case. Sometimes it's the leader is looking for something out of it, but he believes his own, he believes his own story and his own manipulation so much that he's done it so much that it becomes part of his belief system, becomes his truth, quote unquote, his reality. So I think that what we're facing today is understanding. And this is why I mentioned this about the you said it's the most powerful tool, and I don't disagree with that at all. But I wanted to make the contrast or the comparison with the nuclear bomb, right? Because that is a devastating tool, but that's not an individual tool. People don't have individual access to that. What you described in the network effect in social media is a tool, and I would agree, is the most impactful, the most powerful tool that any individual has available to them in the world today. I absolutely agree with the possibilities and the potential of that being the case. And quite frankly, that's one of my main reasons why, because I believe that I've not been real active in social media, right? I mean, I participate in certain ones, but I'm very guarded because I appreciate the concept of the concentric circles of concern, right? That there are certain ones in my inner circle that I've let my hair down the most, from the standpoint, and no pun intended, even though I do got lots of hair to let down. In certain places I do, some places I don't. But as it goes out, there are different amounts of guardedness. There's different amounts of revelation of certain aspects of your being that you just sort of keep, you keep guarded and protected, right? So that there's not the possibility of them unintentionally being used against you. Not that there's something evil there that you're hiding. It's just that it's a protection, right? It's why you have locks on your home, your doors at home and windows at home. It's why you have locks on your cars when you're away from your vehicle. That's why there's, rules and guidelines and regulations. That's why, all of these things, these protections are to protect us as we go away from our, inner sanctum, if you will. So I say all that to say, not really fully understanding it to the depth that we've been discussing it here and that you've described it. My tentativeness in social media has been flavored and influenced significantly, by that concept and by that principle, because I do believe it is a principle. It is something that is, it is a truth about that, especially in context of human behavior. I mean, it's very clear to me that's what is the risk, a major risk. Notwithstanding this, it's not all negative, because we said there are many, many positives that can come out of that, and that's why it is still so. That's why it's even gaining in popularity and pervasiveness, is because there are a lot of good, positive things to be had by the network effect, the expanding. I mean, quite frankly, and I may have told this scenario before. When I first got on Facebook, it was due to a business acquaintance that just sent me an email. It's probably been 15 years ago now. And he says, "Hey, I'm just wanting to invite you to join Facebook." And so I had one friend on Facebook.
No, it's not been 15 years, because 15 years ago you still had to have an edu email address to be on.
So it was more than 10. I know. Because, I know where I was 10 years ago, and I know I was still there, not where I am now. And so it's been a number of years anyway.
Right.
And I didn't do anything. I logged in, I set up my account, and I had a Facebook account. I didn't know what to look for. I didn't know how to operate. All of a sudden, a month or so later, I get an email about a friend request from someone that I had not seen and heard from in over 30 years. He says, "Hey, are you the Doyle that worked at this grocery store next to the campus in this town where I went to college?" And I went, "Yeah." I recognized his name, and I said, "Is this the so-and-so that was the assistant manager when I was working at that grocery store in the next campus?" He said, "Yeah." And so we connected, right? And I had not talked to him or seen him in over 30 years at that particular point in time. And that's a positive network effect, right? Because it expanded my reach, one that would probably have never happened without the advent of social media and that. I don't know how he came upon me. I don't know. I don't, unless maybe I put some information about me that, it was connected, because he ended up going to the same college. He wasn't in college at the time, but he subsequently went to the same university that I went to, and still lives there in that college town. So, I mean, there are some positives, but I think in the environment and the circumstances that we find the world in today, and we've seen numerous occasions where, in protests and riots, and I mean, even the possible things like flash mobs, right? I mean, are used to, for the dance flash mobs that pop up somewhere in cities. Those are positive, but then there's also the negative things where the message can and people can be mobilized in negative ways or in illegal ways or criminal ways with criminal intent, I should say. Positive ways, but with criminal intent, to do some things that really are not positive for society. and not kind of call out one part of the spectrum of beliefs or versus the other, because it happens on all along the political spectrum, all along the belief
Well, I mean,
spectrum, all along the.
I want us to get away from this, and this is a real aside. Like the politics is those groups. That's part of those groups. I'm just going to go ahead and say this, that the whole idea of left, right, up, down, inside out is all of these kinds of groups that are used for negative manipulation, instilling of fear. Both sides, doesn't matter. Any side, doesn't matter. And it's like, this is what I've tried very hard, very recently in my life to get away from, because it is very clear to me that trying to engage with anybody who views things through those lenses is almost futile, because it's like a sports game. It's like, is my team gonna win? And I understand why people get that way about it, but the reality is, if you fall into that level about the topics that you're talking about, then you're beyond understanding the philosophy that underlies the reasons why you should do something or not do something, or why you would have an opinion to do something or not do something. And once you depart the philosophy, you've departed the principles. And once you've departed the principles, you've started on the wide path to hell, so to speak. And like, I just can't go down that anymore. So I guess I would prefer us just to not characterize things through that lens.
Oh, sure. Well, the only reason I called that out was because I wanted to be clear that I wasn't referring to anything along the political spectrum, along the belief spectrum, right? Because, like what you said, it is about the groups and the group dynamics, but even more than that, it's connected to something that I think you said, a couple of our podcasts ago, when you said something to the effect of that a lot of what's happening in these in this scenario of the network effect, people are creating virtual groups that don't truly exist.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In and of themselves, it's not the social group in the sense that we seek social groups to be connected with people that individuals that believe similarly, that act together, to interact together, that support one another, that have similar interests, whatever the case may be. If we're a book club, or a gardening club, or a sports club, or whatever it might be, that's it's more a collegial and friendship oriented and interest oriented. But there's these groups, these pseudo groups that are created by some factor or aspect of identity, right? That's the part that I think is dubious at best, but absolutely nefarious at worst, right? With horrible intent to cause some outcome to with an agenda, as we've talked before, with an agenda and a framing. And then the narrative supports the frame, to justify the framing, to push people toward the agenda.
Right.
And I think that's the thing that is most disconcerting to me, about this whole topic.
And at the end of the day, I know I keep saying the root, but I can't think about these things without trying to ask why a million times to try to understand where all this comes from. But the best conclusion that I've come to is that all of that happens because people feel disempowered. They feel they have no personal power. They feel that they're completely at the whim of other things: society, systems, businesses, government, my parents, the bullies at school, which, I mean, I'm not saying that bullying doesn't exist and that's not a problem, because believe me, I've had my share of that kind of experience. But just saying that I can't do because these things exist, that's a load of horse crap. I mean, pardon my language, but it really is. And I'm tired of people, one, having that perspective, and I understand if you have that perspective, that's fine. Let's sit down. Let's talk about it. I want to talk to people like that and say, look,
Hmm.
you need a perspective shift. That's all you need. But then you have the people who've gone too far, in my estimation, and are joining groups or trying to represent groups or form groups where it's like, come together with us and we'll take up this bat and we'll smash this thing on top of its head. And I mean that figuratively, although some literally, it looks like recently.
Hmm.
But and it's like, because they say that you're right. You don't have power, and the only way to have power is to get in a group with us, and then we'll take it by force. And it's like, knock, knock, knock. Stone Age sticks and stones war is calling again. Would you like to join? I mean, that's basically what we're talking about here, right? And it's like people need to open their eyes and understand. And I don't say that in a disparaging way. This is what's so hard for me. This is inside of me. This is the struggle. Is that it makes me so upset that this is where we find ourselves, that people think they have to resort to these kinds of tactics. And it upsets me that, one, people feel that way, and I want to help them. I want to talk to them and let them understand that it doesn't have to be that way. And then simultaneously, I get livid at the idea that there are people that know full well what they're doing that are manipulating these people into these perspectives because it gives them even more power. It's despicable. It is the mark of a despicable human that would do such a thing. And it's like, and I keep saying that, I know I have my own personal power. We all have our personal power. I'm no victim of these groups, but I feel so deeply bad about those people who are allowing themselves to continue to be victims of those groups and those people. And it's like, I want so badly, and this goes back to the whole, you have to, save yourself. And then it's like, I want so badly to help those people, because I feel like I have relatively clear. I know it's not 100% clear, and I can always improve, and I know I need to continue to improve myself, and that's what I'm trying to do. But I just feel it's so clear to me how they could take 2 steps, change the way that they look at things just a little bit, and then take 2 steps, and then they would feel so completely different about their entire life, and they wouldn't even realize that it was been so simple to do that. And so I know that I don't have myself in enough order yet to be able to affect that, because I'm not affecting that in that way. Does that make sense? It's like me not having done it is the evidence that I'm not ready for that. And that's what I continue to try to address and struggle with in my own life.
Well, and I think part of getting ready, at least it feels this way to me. Part of getting ready is articulating it and sharing it and getting it outside of you, because that makes it real, right? Because inside of us, we can write things off as fantasy, dreams. It's not real. But when we speak it, and I've heard you say this in the past on a different topic and context, you speak it into existence. But I think when we speak it, it becomes much more real to us. And once it becomes more real to us, it becomes something that's easier to act on. And once it's easier to act on, then it will result in more of an outcome rather, and a result. And assuming that that's all genuine, right? That it's right and it's correct and it is truth, then it will have a good outcome, right?
Right.
And it may not have the full good outcome of that one would hope, but it will have a good outcome, right? So that's what I think is most empowering to me about our conversations, is that I'm a firm believer in iron sharpeneth iron, and we discuss, and on an occasion we debate back and forth. But I think the whole intent has been positive. The whole intent is not, I know the intent is positive, right?
Sure.
To make each one of us stronger in our beliefs and more resolved to move things forward in that path of making things reality.
Well,
I say reality versus our reality.
Sure. The reason that all of that works that way, and this is something that I continue. I recently have been able to properly articulate to some degree, and I'm trying to understand it more myself and integrate that more myself. Is that when we think about something and feel internally about something, we characterize that inside of ourselves as talking to ourselves and listening to ourselves, when couldn't be further from the truth, right? Because we don't have the words for what we're doing, because thinking isn't a word that we know what that means. Now, and it sounds weird to say that. So when we conceptualize I'll speak for myself, but I think this is true for other people. When I conceptualize I'm thinking, I hear a voice inside of my head that generates inside of my head, and it's also me listening to that voice. Who's what there? Where does that start? Where do we get ideas from? When we have a dream, where does that come from? So those kinds of ideas fascinate me, and I think about them a lot. But the reality of it is, the reason why we have to say what we're thinking is because that's transmutation. That's transmuting the energy of whatever's going on. I say in our brain, but who knows it's just in our brain, right? We don't know any of this kind of stuff, and people want to claim they do. You're wrong. I'm sorry, you're just wrong. And now there may be activity there, but you don't know what's going on in there, if it's there or here or around me or what. So the point being is that's a different thing than speaking. And so speaking is taking that thing and transmuting it, transforming it into the speech. That's why, and this is so funny. It's like you'll think something so seriously and deeply, and like, yes, I believe that. And then the second you say it, like, well, no, I don't. That's wrong. Like, as soon as you say it, you say, whoa, that's wrong. Like, that's happened to me countless times, but it's good, right? Because it's clarifying, and then you understand more. So people think that it, and this is why it's dangerous for people. And I'm glad that you're starting to take strides away from this approach. People get that. Well, I don't have anything to say. What would I say? Where would I say it? Nobody's going to listen to me. Doesn't matter. You see it. You hear it. You understand it. So if at the very least you put yourself in more order and understand who you are more, and that is infinitely important and infinitely valuable. That people just don't understand how valuable that is. I think.
Let me simplify it, because it's kind of like being, doing something honest when no one else sees it, and someone goes, well, no one will know. Yes, someone will. I will know. And it's the same thing you say there, because that's what makes it real. When it goes from in here to out here, either through word or through actions, then that's what I was saying, it becomes real, right? And so I think that was spot on, what you said about when you think you believe something and you say it, and as soon as it becomes real, you realize the fault in it, or the error in it, or whatever, the fallacy about it, and it became real for a moment, and then you realize, no, that's not right, that's not correct, that's not what I think and what I feel,
right?
Because it's wrong, improper, or incorrect.
That's why it's so expanding on this a little bit, and we've gone off, I think, a good bit of the topic, but I think this is important. It's very critical that you are careful about what you say when you say it, when you are not alone, right? So, like, for example, like this podcast, that's why, like, I know you've noticed, and I'm sure anybody watching this has noticed that when I talk, I'll stop and I'll think a lot before I say stuff, or I'll speak kind of slowly when I speak. Because I'm trying to be very careful about what I say, because I want to make sure that what I say is what I mean. And then a lot of times I'll stop myself as soon as I start, like, oh, no, I don't mean that, because it's important that when you speak for an audience, that you are clear with what you're trying to communicate. Because that speaking in that way is a much more impactful thing than when you just speak to yourself, or within, depending on that group, right? The groups that we're talking about, the concentric concern circles, right? Like when it's like your closest friends, it's not as big of a deal, because they know your heart, they know who you are, they know where you're coming from and your intentions. But when it comes to, like, person X, they don't know anything, so they have to take you literally at your word, right? At only your word and no other context. And so that's why you have to be very careful about it. But just as much as you have to be very careful about that, you need to speak unabashedly and fluidly to yourself. And that's hard. That's the benefit of really good friends and family, is to be able to do that with. But two, that's why technology is so amazing. Because you can put a camera in front of yourself, say something, talk for 30 minutes about a topic, and then go back and watch it. I do this obsessively. I go I do this podcast. I have other podcasts that I'm on, and I do some videos. I do live streaming and stuff like that, and I'm always going back and watching it because I want to see, well, how. A lot of people are like, well, how did you want to know how you came across? Were you silly? And no, I don't care about that. I want to know is what I'm doing representing what I'm intending to do, and am I doing something, one, that I need to stop doing, not because like, oh, it's silly or it's not effective, but because it's not true for me. It's not my truth. It's not me speaking truth or doing truth or enacting truth, or is there something I need to learn that, oh, that was really good, I need to do more of that? And so people are like, well, you're just trying to get better at what you're doing. You're right, I am trying to get better at what I'm doing, but not in the way that most people conceptualize it. I'm not trying to, get to where I can make more money or do something so that I can be more successful in other people's eyes. I'm doing it so that I can represent more accurately what I'm trying to represent when I speak, when I do, act, whatever in the world, perform, whatever that is. And it's super important, like to go back and try to consume that and critique it, especially before you try to share it with wider audiences.
Yeah. Improve any potential disconnect between what's going on inside of you and what's coming out of you.
Right.
It's sort of, not that there's an intentional, but to your point, there's risk of it being imprecise once it's out. And you mentioned about being impactful once you say something. It is impactful if you say it wrong to other people, and other people hear it and consume it because you have no control over it.
Correct.
But I think it's just as impactful if you say something wrong inside yourself or to yourself.
Well, that's the thing, is if you don't say it out loud, you never know if it's wrong. That's the big problem, is most people don't ever speak it, and so they don't ever know, and they spend their entire lives persisting in an energy that is completely stymieing them from being able to do anything effective in their life. And it's sad, man. It's sad.
So I think we're at a good spot to pause and think about our next podcast next week. Or whenever it happens to happen. And I think we're at a spot I would like for us to continue to go down this path, because I think this is one where I think we can start pulling more things together and into a fabric of who we are. Because we've talked about this, but we've never really come and just talked about what our beliefs are, or even who we are. I don't mean what our names are. That's people can find that if they're interested in that. Anyone can find that, and I'd tell them if they ask. But I'm talking about the who you are as an essence, right? And it's that's made up of the fabric of what you think, what you speak, what you believe, and what you embrace as truth. And I said that probably in not a way that I wanted it to come out.
Here's a better way. Why you do what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's a complex picture, and many times that your inner circle, you mentioned, they know you, they know your heart, they know what you mean, they know your intent, and so they will. If you say something incorrect, they may correct you. Hey, you didn't mean that, did you? You really mean this? Oh yeah, that's right. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to use the wrong word. Because it was different in here than what came out.
Right.
But the larger group, but then this kind of allows one to, if they take the opportunity to stop and do the inward look about, and I think this is again it becomes real when you speak it. And so I think I really want to start kind of moving down this path a little more. And I think this is a good, not that we get to the the whole everything next week, but I think it's a good next step.
I think you're right, because you've triggered some thinking on my side. I'm making some notes so I don't forget for next time.
Oh, we don't forget these things, do we?
Yeah. So I think that's really definitely appropriate, and I think that what'll be good about this conversation next time is that it will dovetail with the whole idea of the positive, right? And I think that. That's what we need more focus on in society right now. There's plenty of focus on the negative aspects.
There's a lot of focus going on too.
a lot of focus and some hocus. It's about that time of year, actually.
It is.
which we could talk about that too, which would be interesting to talk about how things seemingly randomly coincide in life, but that's aside from the fact for right now. But yeah, I think that's good because that's we can talk about a route to continuing to try to leverage network effect and other things like that for the positive, for the good, and reinforce and focus on that, and try to understand why that I think isn't quite as effective in the climate right now, or it doesn't get as much airtime in the climate right now as the other, because I think that there's a lot of really good stuff going on that people just don't see.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, we've about hit our time limit for today. And not that we really have one. We just arbitrarily, I say that as a good way to try to wrap up and segue into the next one. But anyway, it's been a pleasure. I enjoyed
Always.
it. It's always, challenging. It helps me exercise this old brain of mine and keep some of the wrinkles. If I don't get to put new ones in there, it helps me keep some of the wrinkles that I have. But I really enjoy that. It really is therapeutic in a lot of respects, but it's also cathartic in that it allows me to make some things real that maybe I have not in the past by speaking them out.
Same here, Joel. I really appreciate you, as always, taking the time to speak with me.
My pleasure.
All right. Take care.
Until next time. Bye.